Hey, and welcome to this video and see the light, easy wins to improve your asset framework experience. In the previous two videos, we started solving some of the problems that the power system administrator and the engineer found when they were going through the work that the power system team had done. The first issue was that in the displays it wasn't possible to switch across to the unit FFS05. We discovered that this was because FFS05 wasn't based on the element template, and we went ahead and fixed that. The best practice applied there was that all elements and assets in your asset framework should be based on an element template. The second issue we ran into was that for units 3, 4, and 6, the sugar grain size attribute was all referencing exactly the same pi tag. Now the problem there is that the system had been set up using allow extensions, and what that allows you to do is to add separate attributes to your elements in AF. The problem with this is that it leads to maintenance problems down the line where you forget to update, you end up with copy-paste errors, and you can't just make a change to the template. So the fix there is to use a derived template where we added that sugar grain size attribute to a separate derived template from the sugar FFS template, applied that through, and now everything is based on the template, and we can disallow extensions on that asset, hopefully avoiding maintenance issues like this in the future. The third issue we ran into, and that's what we're going to go ahead and solve now, is that when the engineer was poking around in PowerVision and came across this sandbox FFS monitoring display, we saw that the sealer temperature was not in the correct operating bounds. We can see here it's between 48 and 60. However, the engineers know that the temperature should range somewhere between 70 at an absolute minimum and 270 at an absolute max. That's because this has got to seal, melt, and separate some plastic film. If this problem was contained to FFS01, we would have to go and look at that specific asset in Power System Explorer and fix that. However, it looks like it's applying to all of our assets. So number 4 is in the similar range, as is number 2. So like we've already discussed, we can't make configuration changes in PowerVision, so we're going to switch across to Power System Explorer. And we can see that we have selected the FFS01 element, and we've got our sealer temperature. Now, a value of 57 doesn't make sense in Fahrenheit. However, when these sensors were purchased, they were purchased from Europe, so they are configured to collect data in Celsius. We thought we'd taken care of that conversion factor because the PIAF system does have it does have a inbuilt awareness of units of measure. However, we must have missed some setting that told it needs to perform the conversion. So to check the settings, we'll go ahead and click on the settings button over here. And we can see that for FFS01, our default unit of measure is Fahrenheit. That's fine. However, it's got a field here for source units. The most common thing we see is that people leave source units to the default. And if your control system and your sensors are set up in Fahrenheit and you are displaying in Fahrenheit, that's not a problem. However, we've just run into the issue where the sensors are measuring in Celsius. We use and display the temperature in Fahrenheit, so we need to fix that. I could go ahead and change my source units here for FFS01. However, this needs to apply to all of our assets, so we're not going to make the change on the specific element. We're going to go ahead and say cancel here, and in our library, we are going to open up the sandbox FFS template. Now this display looks slightly different because in the previous exercise, we grouped all of the assets by the attributes by template. What we're going to go is switch it back to category, and this looks more like what we're used to seeing in our elements. We have the sealer temperature attribute over here, and going to the same place, we can click on our settings, and now we can see our source units. They are not Fahrenheit, our source units are coming in degrees C. If at all possible, it's always a good idea to specify your units of measure at every point so that you do not run into this issue where the default is not the actual setting you're working with. We'll go ahead and say OK. And that's as simple as it is. We've told the system that the data coming in is in Celsius and that we want to display it in Fahrenheit. If we switch back to our elements and find an asset that's working, okay, we can see that a value of 137.45 Fahrenheit is much more reasonable. I'll go ahead, check in my changes. And as always, we can switch across to Power Vision. And let's go ahead and switch to FFS04. Now again, we see that it is still registering in Fahrenheit. If we wait a while, it will come up as a reasonable value. And there we go, the crawler just picked up the change that we made, and that is a much more reasonable result. In the next lesson, there's going to be a bit of information for you to read through that discusses the difference between the data archive engineering units and the asset framework units of measure.